I hadn't noticed, but I'll take their word for it, is that the text box don't have normally a border around them. So they made a border, they made a background of essentially just a single white line. And let's see, text view border. Where is that again? Yeah, oh, a drawable, right. Oh, here we go. And that's just an XML file just to display a rectangle. So it is responsible for, might have to look real close. You can very faintly see, like if you look around my email address, you can see that there's a thin white border. All right. Okay. So, again, that was done via the styles to go and apply that to save the hassle of having to do that for everyone and to allow for consistency and ease of changing. Next thing they do is they use an XML file for the menu, and they do similar to what we've done in other cases, whereas instead of having our code create things, we're going to use the inflator to inflate this menu. So the layout of the menu is described in this XML file. So, for example, when you press the menu, what it's going to do is it's going to go and inflate this XML file so we have our menu item for add contact on the main menu. Then when we're viewing a contact, we have a different menu and there's a different XML file, and that will get inflated when we're viewing that. All right? So just a different way to represent it. I suppose it really isn't a huge difference. It's seems to be more of a personal preference to me. I can't really make too strong of an argument either way. I will say I kind of like the idea of having them in a separate layout file because, for one thing, you can go in and you can change it based on language. You can change it based on screen density, size. You can put all those resource qualifiers on it. And plus, it just, in my mind, cleans up the code. All right, as opposed to having a bunch of instructions that are, if you remember back how we did menus in the other examples, we actually had lines where we went in and we created menu items and programmatically, and that, you know, that even though it's not complicated code, it sort of clutters things a bit. So I do kind of like this approach. All right, I wondered what I was kicking down here. All right. Let's see. What is next? Layouts. We have 3 layouts, and those correspond to essentially the 3 things that we see on the 3 activities that we have. We have a where we're listing that, which is a oh, this is a listing an individual contact. So this is a view for that, right? Here is to view. That's to view it on the first page where we have back here where we have a list of that. So each one of these got inflated from this guy. All right. We then have to view a contact and then to add a contact. Yeah. No, this represents one of those. So that will get put into the list. If we look at the activity, that extends list activity. Somewhere in here, if we look through, it's inflating that for each where is it? Somewhere in here. It's inflating that for each member of the list. All right. All right. Let's look at the classes. There's 4 classes, one for each activity. There's the main sort of one, the address book, the main one that pops up. There is to view an individual contact. And there is the add, edit, contact. Actually, I think I'm confusing myself. The view, I believe, is to view the list of contacts. Or not. We'll see through that. I'm confusing myself. We do have a database connector class, and let's spend a little bit of time looking at that, because this is a class that sort of handles the connection and handles the updating and all that of the database. We look at this. There is a list of properties associated with this: the database name, the fact that it's a SQLite database, and we're using a database open helper to control some of that creation. If we look, we have, when we connect to it, one thing that we will do is we will go in and we will call that database open helper to go in and try to open it. And what it will do is it will go and try to open it, and if it does not exist, it will create it. And part of creating it will create it with a particular table in it. So effectively, the first time through, it goes and runs that create statement to create the table. We could have something to, if there was an update of the version, we could do some sort of processing, possibly run something that would convert and maybe take from one table into, take a table, maybe copy the data, recreate the table, copy the data back, and maybe fill in some default values. We could probably do in that on upgrade.
I think they said in the book they don't have an upgrade because.
Okay. Right. 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 Sure. Sure.
I was kind of surprised at the name of the database.
Let's see. Yeah, that's a good point. Well, if you notice in general, like for example, when you refer to the drawable, you just refer to the name. Like when you have the icon, it's just icon and all that. So it could be a continuation of that. Oh, could be. We then have a couple statements in here that we'll look at now, and we'll see them in action in a bit. One is to insert a new contact. And again, it simply is creating a new contact with some values. Effectively, these are like parameters that are going to be passed to the insert statement. So we create that content value object, new content. Content value of a new contact, because we're adding contacts. We then go and we put in there sort of an ordered pair of the database column and the value that we want it to be. So we would have a whole list of things. Then finally, when we're done, we open the database, we invoke the insert command, and that should go and insert it using the name and the value that we put into our content values. Yeah, an ordered pair of database column name and value. All right. So, the database instruction normally would be an insert. Insert into contacts. If you were writing out the SQL statement, insert into contacts, and then would have the list of columns that we're doing. And the columns would be name, email, phone, street, city. And then we'd have the values. Well, by creating this content value object, we're putting in the names of the fields and we're putting in the values.
Is there only
That is a good question. Yeah, that is a good question. Let's Google that. Oh. Oh, that is weird. There we go. Content values. Could be there are overloaded functions that allow us to. Change key, describe context, get as Boolean, get as string. Yeah, so the put's overloaded to different data types. So yeah, if you did have a double, it'd be the same function call, but you'd be calling the appropriate one because that function's overloaded. All right. And then, whoops, we invoke the insert statement into contacts and then close. Update as a very similar thing, all right, except we create our content values and we put all the things that we're updating, and we then call the database update and pass that. The second piece of this is a where clause that we are adding on to it, so we don't update everything, so we only update the appropriate ID. All right, and then lastly, here's to get one content, where again we're doing a database query, and we're pulling up a specific ID. The difference between that and all contacts are that in the all contacts one, there is no where clause. Right, the where clause is in the get one contact is what only pulls up the one. The fact that there is no where clause on the get all pulls all of them up. Then finally we have the delete, where we specify delete and we pass the ID. So it's a nice way, in a way, to sort of simplify and abstract, the basic database operations. You don't have to worry about things such as escaping characters for things like, normally things like a quote in a text field is problematic. Like if you try to do the name O'Donnell or something, and you have to go in and you have to parse that and code that and all that and encode it so that you escape those characters. But the fact that we're using this content values object, apparently that handles it for us. In a lot of languages you have that. I remember, this is a totally different platform, but in ASP.NET, I remember in the original ASP, you had to code all of that by hand. All right, so if you wrote a SQL statement, you had to go in and look at the value, and if the value contains some of these characters, you parse out of it, and all that. Whereas in the .NET, the parameters, there's a parameter class that takes care of that, and it looks like this serves the same role. So that's nice. You don't have to worry about how to format things. You just go ahead and do that.
Yeah, it's kind of like block query, just because I'm used to SQL statements.
Right. Oh, the raw query actually allows you to put the SQL statements in. Yeah. Okay. All right. Right, right. Essentially, like what this is doing is, this is saying the table you want to query from. Here are the fields that they want. So they want to pull the ID and the name. The third one is the where clause. All right. And the rest of the things, I don't know. And then the last one apparently would be the sort, because it's sorting by name. Okay. So what this does effectively is it just plops the values into your select statement. So, you know, like anything, for folks that maybe aren't terribly familiar with it, it makes their job easy. But for folks that do understand it, in some respects, it can be just an obstacle. You know, because it's doing stuff for you. Yeah, that's easy, but you know, the downside is that it takes some of the control out of your hands. All right. So that is the database thing. Now, one thing that we'll notice in the database thing, and as we move on to the address book activity itself, we'll notice that when we look in here, the things that do database operations, they have as extending the async task object. All right. What this is this is a quick and dirty and cheap way to get some sort of multi-threading, that you don't have to worry about defining the threats and all that. Defining the threats, right. Defining the threads and all that. All right. The idea here is this. Remember, the whole reason that we get into this thread business to begin with is we don't want our GUI UI to become unresponsive because it's running out and doing something else. So again, in computer terms, the DB operations, if I had a whole bunch of contacts, that would be a long time to retrieve all of those. You know, it might only be fractions of a second, but again, it's a long time. So any of the database operations are sort of wrapped up in this async task that allows us to go and say, let's go and do things. And the benefit of that then is that the UI thread can still do its thing, and it's not going to get clogged up waiting for the database. So, for example, we go and we pull this. One of the things that we do is we get the contact, or we call it get contacts task, which is, again, is defined as extending the async task. We create our database connector. All right. We create a cursor. We have a do in background, these parameters, to open the database and call the database connectors return all contacts. So what this will do is this will call the database and get back a list of contacts. Now, we then have a post execute to set the adapter's cursor to the result set. So that effectively fills in the adapter for this and will show us then the list of contacts. So again, if we can follow this through, we call the get contact task. Because that's an async task, there's several methods in the async task. One of them is called do in background that accepts, that goes and actually does the SQL query, opens the database, returns the connectors, get all contacts. That's what we looked at before. And then finally, post-execute, it goes and effectively associates that result set with our adapter. So that's what actually displays the list. All right. If we were, for example, to get rid of that, you know, if we were to not change the cursor, it would retrieve them but not display them again. It wouldn't set the adapter for that.
So what's that syntax? Object, ...
I believe it is is that? I lost it. Here. I thought it, let's see. I think this is just this is like an abbreviation because we're I think that's just the way that Eclipse is showing it. Yeah, let's go and look. Let's just go and view it through the operating system. Because that was in the address book. Open with text edit. Oh, it is object ... params. I am not 100% sure. Let's look. Yeah. If we look at the help for this, it shows us doing background URL ... URLs. Yeah, that is a good question. Now, this also will allow you to have like a progress bar too, because we can have on progress update. We can put some code in there to indicate that something's going on. So, the doing background we have a on post execute that will say what's done. Then finally we have a progress update that can show that. The ... probably represents a list, the fact that there can be multiple of these. Because if you notice, like this is calling three these. Invoked in background immediately after on execute. Step is used background computations. Step can also use. Yeah. I have to say I'm not sure on what those three dots represent. All right. But you'll notice that this will do this throughout the app, any of the database operations, because those have the potential for taking a little bit longer, will be done in the background. All right. So at this point, we are at the point where we have displayed the list of contacts. All right. On Create Options menu, then again, as we called before, goes in and inflates that XML file. So rather than here creating the instructions, it does that. Let's look at that menu XML file again. See the attributes, there's an item, there is add contract item, and so on down the line. The on-click listener then goes and, since there's only one option on the menu, all right, pretty straightforward. If we clicked an item, that means we want to do an add. So we go in and we invoke that new intent, all right, to view a contact. So view contact activity. We'll go and do this. Now, what does this do? This goes ahead and grabs pointers to all the text boxes on the screen and yeah. Correct. Correct. Yeah. Correct. So it has a row ID here, so it knows which one that we want. So it will go in then and it calls the load contact task, giving it that ID that got passed into it. You're absolutely right. That got passed from the previous one. Let's go back and double check that. Where's the on click? Oh, yeah. We kind of skipped over that part. That's where it goes in and puts extra parameters on there. That's where it put the ID on there. All right. I didn't get past this. I just looked at that and then we immediately jumped over. But yeah, there's a... It creates the intent. And yeah, and now we go and we put the parameters that we want to pass and then we actually start that activity. And then this guy then can pluck that off of there and now has the row ID that can go and do the lookup. It does the lookup in about the same way that it did the getting the listing of them. That is, it calls a sync task for lookup. And what this does is this opens the database and returns database connector, get one content, and it passes the one param. What about them? That is a great question. Right. To put it in the on, yeah. Well, and that's a great point. The one thing I would say is when we think back to the previous activity, all right, it might be a little more obvious to see it in that previous activity. Let's think about what we're doing here with that previous activity. Because in the previous activity, the code to retrieve is in the onResume. Okay, it's not on the onCreate where you might think it would be. But let's think that through and why maybe it's better in the onResume. We go in here, we're looking, here's our two contacts. I go to the menu, add a contact, add, whoops, fill in, let's say. All right. I go and save. All right. We've now resumed that activity, so we want to do the refresh.
See, I've noticed following this activity, right? In other words, when you do it, whenever you call start activity, I think it automatically calls on create. That just
Well, let's see. Let's.
I noticed in my code,
Yeah.
it's called on create every time,
Okay.
which is not what I wanted to do happen.
Right.
Maybe that's
Right.
so.
Right.
Yeah, that's probably it.
Yeah,
So,
it could be.
right, because if I call on create every time, everything.
Right. Right. Yeah, that could be. All right. So, where were we? We do our load, and then we have the on post execute. Whoops. All right. We have the on post execute. And remember that is after our background task finishes, this is code that we want to go and do. And so we point our cursor at the first item, which should be the only item, right? Because if we're doing a select with the ID, we should only be getting that one. If you remember, the select was, the get one, was running a query that says, get one contact. We're pulling from the contact table, and we're specifying an ID. So we should only get one of them. So therefore, this code here should only get the one. So move to first is pulling the only one. And then we're going to go in and pull from that cursor the different values. The index, yeah. Yeah, I would agree with that. And then ultimately the job is that we want to fill the text box from, since we have the index of it, now we want to pull the string that's associated with that index. All right. And then the result is that after we've clicked on one, we get this with our text box filled in. So there we're viewing a contact. We then have a menu to edit or delete the contact. And again, this guy gets created on here by inflating that other XML file. And this time on item selected is a little bit more involved. We have to look to see which item got selected. So if we're editing, we load up all our parameters and start the add edit contact. Otherwise, we run our delete contact that will pop up a dialog box and actually go and delete or not. All right, let's go through that a bit at a time. By the way, again, the ... I think refers to the fact that can get called with like any number of parameters as I look through this. Yeah. All right. So here we create our intent. We pass all those things along on there. We start our intent. This goes and grabs a pointer to all that stuff. Make sure that there's something there in the extras, and then populate those edit text boxes. And then creates a save contact button and all that. And likewise has the code to save the contact in a asynchronous task. Again, just keeping that common theme going for that. Now, where does the add bit come in? All right, because this activity is called add edit contact. If we look at the address book, we create our intent and start it. All right. If we click on the edit when we're viewing a contact, we create our intent and start it. The difference being is that when we go in and call it when we're in edit mode, we pass all those values in the extras. That saves us having to look it up in a database. All right. So then this activity. Well, it depends if you're coming in. With the edit, they are in the database. We're just putting it to the edit screen so that we can change them and save them back. All right. With the add, these extras are null, so it starts out with a blank slate instead of with pre-populated with that. Now notice again, we use that same thing to differentiate between whether to do an insert or an update. We look to see if the intents extras had anything on it. If there's nothing on it, that means that we're starting with a blank slate. That is, we're doing an insert. So we go in and we insert the content and we pass those values. If there was something in the extras for that, then we call the update statement and we pass the row ID and the different values for the different fields. And so then the update gets called. So again, we're using this one activity to handle both the insert and the update. And there's a little bit of intelligence in there based on whether it got some parameters, whether it should be in edit mode or insert mode. Which is kind of slick. Yep. So let's run this through real quick. Or do you have any questions about this? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you want to take some time to look at your app and do you have questions about it, or?
Well, my main question is, what if, like, let's say you already have data, let's say you were distributing the database.
Okay.
Filled out. Never in the closed database, never updated, let's say.
Okay.
How would we distribute?
Okay.
You read only.
Okay, so the question is let's say we want to make a read-only database that gets installed with our application.
Yeah, I put it in my asset folder.
Uh-huh.
I put it in there. Figured, well, somehow it has to be preempted.
Right.
Well, I had to resort to copying it into the empty.
Mm-hmm.
Manually copying it. And then I found some code somewhere, and they would even copy CSS. So, you know the path that you do. File.
All right, let's. One way, again, I don't know the answer to this question, obviously. Yeah, the question was raised, just so that the recording picks it up, is what if you had a read-only database of, a bunch of stuff, all right? And you wanted to initialize that, when you wanted to load that when you loaded the application.
Distributing your app.
Right.
The database is part of the app.
The database is considered to be part of the app. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. How can you do it? Now, one thought that comes to mind of how you could do it would be something like this. You could possibly write code here on this on create.
Yeah, instead of doing that,
You're right.
do something else.
Well, you'd create the table, you'd create the database.
Well, but no.
Well, let's back up. Let's back up. We would not have the database as part of the app. We would deploy it just like this. Would try to open the database. It would call the onCreate. The onCreate could create the database, create the table, and then possibly suck in the data from an XML file or something. That'd be one way to do it. All right.
Create an empty database, basically.
Yeah, create an empty database and then populate it, import the data like from an XML file or a tab delimited file or something like that.
Well, let's say I have an actual database. You could read from an actual database. An SQL database.
Yeah,
Assets.
right.
So yeah, you're saying create it here and then
Yeah,
go into my assets.
and then import that in. Yeah, that would be one possibility. Let's see if there's some other. That's the thought that immediately comes to mind. You know, for installation reasons and all that. The reason I was thinking an XML file or a tab delimited file is that might keep the size down. Yeah, right. With the XML, definitely. But with if you're talking about like if you were doing this, if you wanted to have the contacts pre-populated, all right. If you were giving this out to your sales reps and you wanted the contacts pre-populated, then if it was something simple like that, then yeah, maybe like a tab delimited file would be enough to suck it in and bring it. Yeah. Let's see what other thoughts are. Right. And when? Oh, no, that's the wrong thing. Best practices. Week 3, Tony showed us the SQLite, blah, blah. Task manager is initialized. Task manager app, of course, initialized the database. Initialize a fairly large lookup table. Of course, you use the onCreate, maybe have an init method of some kind, but what should I do? Should I hand code parsing a CSV file and call the insert in a loop, or is it some way to do it? If you know all the values to be inserted, you could create a .sql file and use it that way. You don't have to parse a file. And I should store it in the assets directory. How can I refer to it? You can reference it using InStream. As far as what's better, if you didn't have... Yes, you should be able to use an open raw resource to copy a binary across from your raw resource folder to the device. Based on the code input stream. Okay. Right. Okay. Interesting. Here's another one, loading large reference database in Android. Reference data. Read only, this used to validate other piece of data, blah, blah, blah. Stored in a SQLite, targeted for smartphones. Loading the database, even if it's once off, took too long. People are not willing to wait many minutes. The database storage took up 10 megabytes. Preload database. Database coding had to be removed from the Android code and rewritten as a separate program. The program read the text input file and inserted rows, and the database stored on my desktop. Note that the primary key should be named _ID. The Android application didn't need to be packaged with the text input file anymore, trimming the APK. Application starting activity would check and download the database file if it didn't already exist in the... For Android 2.2, the directory returned by get external files directory. Best way to achieve this, create a subclass of async task and put the downloading code in do in background. File downloader is my own delegate class, performs the actual downloading is initialized. Do you want me to post these resources to Angel? And let me go and do that now while I still have them up. If any of my web development students are watching, I am not typing in a break tag there. It's your TV is messed up. One of them. The other one was O'Reilly. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Stack Overflow is the one that I keep finding stuff on. Yeah. Yeah, that seems to be a favorite. Also, if you're watching web development students, I did not actually just type in link 1 or link 2. That is a very descriptive title for the link. It's your imagination. Actually, I'll put that as link 1 because I talked about that first. Right. There we go.
So I know there's an insert command.
Right.
Insert to.
Right.
So once you do a query, get a record.
Right. A select, yeah, a query or a select, right.
So you do a select from the
Right. Right.
push it to the
Right.
new date.
Right. Right. Right.
There,
Right.
instead of having to do anything at all,
Right.
just like an ASCII.
Right. Right. Right.
It just would seem that there's gotta be some mechanism for it.
Yeah, that's a good question. I have to say I'm not aware of anything beyond the stuff that we discussed today for that. All right, other questions or? Okay. FYI, the quiz I will make available tomorrow, and I'll give you a week to do it. That's a little bit longer than I typically do, but because of the holiday, it should even out. Yeah, right. Depending on yeah, exactly. All right.
Yeah, that was really directly relevant. Okay.
Right. Good.
I remember Pat last time said,
Right. Let's see what's next. Ooh, a route tracker. Oh, that should be fun. Actually, you no longer have to obtain a Google API key. I don't think. Yeah. This is a class apparently that they skipped when they put out the new iPhone 5 because apparently there's all kinds of problems with their mapping. Yeah, they must have been sick that day or something. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. But on the other hand, the benefits of their platform is largely grows out of the result of their philosophy.
yeah, it's like
Right.
not Microsoft, which is
Right.
updated.
Right. So the closeness of it is one of the things that makes it so simple and all that. But then, I have a good compromise. I think I love this laptop. I mean, this is like 6-7 years old, and it still runs pretty solid. And I can put Windows on it if I want. I'm really low on disk space, so I took it off. But I've had Windows, and I've had Linux on there before. So I can do all that. But for the phone, I like the Android. I like to be able to just take control by it and pop it in and do what I need to do with it, without having to jailbreak it or root it or whatever. So, all right.